I'm pretty sure there's probably only about one person that might have been at the first version of this. So just a quick recap, because this is part 2. 2 years ago, I joined Q Associates, just over 2 years ago. And the first engagement I had was very much a sort of confessional about building a cloud company. As was just mentioned there, my background's been in startup organisations with emerging technologies, and the most recent one being when we founded Virtualize IT back in the early 2000s. Got that to a point in the market where we were approached by venture capitalists to set up a cloud company from scratch. That went on to become VirtuStream, and as was mentioned, was sold earlier this year to EMC for a sizable amount of money. And very much it was about what were the challenges in actually building a company from scratch with an emerging technology and sceptical client base, very much so, which really mirrored exactly what we went through when we founded Virtualize IT with virtualization. Now, what this talks more about is, in that 2 years, very much, there are still companies founding and becoming cloud services organisations without a doubt. But what we see in our client base now is, we were the organisation then that was the cloud builder. We were enabling it, we were taking it to market. Very much now we've found actually it's our clients, it's flipped around, our clients are actually the cloud builders of today. We see totally that it's a hybrid market. There's hardly a client we deal with that don't use cloud in some way. And very much Q's position in that is we're orchestrating the hybrid cloud. So it's really just go through a number of client experiences, some of the tales behind it, some of the gotchas. And there are some strict guidelines around this talk. Rule number 1, no selling. Now, I work very closely with the sales team, but I almost label myself anti-sales. All I'm about is going in and actually finding what the issue is, hopefully coming up with an innovative way of solving that problem. And for me, the sale takes care of itself. I work with a great team of salespeople, and I'll mention because they're at the back of the room and they're going to lynch me afterwards. But at the end of the day, we're in business just to solve people's issues. So if you hear any selling from me, you can use the cards that they'll give you for a free service at the end of it and throw them at the end of it. Okay, so very much what we're seeing now with our client base is real turbulence in the way that IT is managed, leveraged and consumed. We've got our traditional client there that's got their own sizable infrastructures. They're still feeding, they're still watering them, but very much there's a question mark about, is that the right way to be doing things? Alongside that, what we've got is clients where they've got heavy DevOps going on. Shadow IT, it's got loads of different names, but basically the business has moved ahead. The tablet, the Apple industry and everything like this, everyone wants everything much, much faster. And we see very much traditional IT sometimes is labelled as the obstacle to innovation. So therefore it's taking part in another part of the business and it's going at great pace, potentially though not with the same controls that's actually been done in the traditional side. So there's a bit of a dilemma there. In amongst all of that, we've also got the managed services cloud providers, very much coming into the client base. And in amongst all of this, we have the client in the middle wondering, how do I deploy my latest applications, which is the right way? And that's very much where we sit. We sit with the client saying, well, okay, it could be any one of those that's the right choice. And it will probably end up being all of those in some instances. But it's really about selecting the right decision for the right applications. But very much we see that the market is very, very turbulent. So some of the trends that we're seeing, certainly in the client base, the hyperscale has been largely adopted. We have clients that use huge amounts of AWS. It's quick, it's easy to get up and running. But we typically find that a lot of them, once they've been consuming it for a while, if they had virtualization before and they suffered sprawl in that, it's nothing to the sprawl they're having in AWS. All of a sudden, they've got hundreds, thousands of services running out there, and they're not quite sure what they're all doing. So control very much is a sort of watchword for us with our client base where that's happening. Microsoft was slightly later to the game, but certainly have picked up pace. Lots of Office 365 deployments we're seeing. Lots of consumption of Azure. And in most of the client base, they're probably using all three of those as well. You've got the sort of more discrete uses. Obviously, Salesforce has been a huge sort of success. and other CRMs are following that. So organisations deploying CRMs typically are looking towards a cloud deployment of that. ERP systems as well. SAP got onto the bus and have very much pushed that as well. It was traditionally seen, certainly when we were in VirtuStream, there was a heritage of SAP clients, and very much the idea of pushing SAP out to the cloud was seen as slightly strange because they believed the workloads just couldn't handle it. I think you're seeing a sort of flip there when you actually look at the workloads within SAP. It may well be running huge amounts in the business, but actually not that different from most other applications. It sort of has this mystique around actually what it's doing. So certainly you're sort of seeing those type of applications being deployed there. Business intelligence, we certainly see a lot of that with our clients, where they're looking to leverage huge amounts of data more effectively and turn them into useful information. Lots of BI being delivered in the cloud. And then we get even more discrete things. So as the internal infrastructures, which predominantly in the past would have been Q's mainstay of what we do, is really looking after people's own infrastructures, very much you're seeing clients looking to do more subtle deployments of infrastructures. So very much things like business continuity, ITSCM, they're looking to leverage the cloud for that. I met with a client yesterday that I've dealt with for 12 years, and they used to deploy data centres. They've just got an office relocation going on in central London. He's not getting a data centre this time round. They've worked out the costing of it, and it's something like $5 million a year in just the cost of the building. That's not in his budget now, so he's very much looking to leverage the cloud to deploy his data centre where he used to run it himself. And managed private cloud. We saw a lot of rebranding in internal organisations, IT, where there was a lot of pressure to say, what's our cloud strategy? And there was a whole rebranding of internal infrastructures to be private cloud, both by the vendors, but equally that got adopted by consumers of this infrastructure. And now what we're seeing is actually the evolution of that. So it was one thing doing almost an internal marketing exercise to say we run a private cloud, but now we're actually dealing with organisations that are actually looking at how would a cloud operator actually run this infrastructure. How do we get a service catalogue? How do we get it out to the client base quicker? So we're doing a lot with clients where they're actually becoming true internal cloud providers. And that very much leads into the next one, where there's lots of projects that people are running to say we actually need to become an IT as a service organisation internally. And in QVision, a lot of the things that I'm doing with people is to work through those strategies. But there's also like an operational alignment you can do, where you see various maturity models all aligned to ITIL that sort of say, well, okay, go through these disciplines, how well do you score? And then usually the results are fairly ugly, unfortunately, because most organisations are probably understaffed, underfunded, and probably do a best practice attempts at various areas. But when you go in through in forensic detail, saying, well, okay, how do you handle your capacity management? Is it aligned to the business of actually demand management? It falls down. So we go through a number of exercises with people to say, well, okay, here's the assessment. Now, which areas would you target? Because certainly in internal organisations, they don't have to adopt everything that an external supplier would do. But there's certain areas that would probably make massive gains. So we sort of score that and go back to say, these are the areas you could really focus on and make a huge jump basically on your operational efficiency of what you're doing and become that internal IT as a service provider. And so that links very much into becoming almost a cloud enablement strategy for organisations. Drop in some stats here. These are from the RightScale survey in 2014. Some brilliant sort of terminologies here. So basically it's just breaking it down into the level of cloud adoption that's out there, and also broken down into the SME and the enterprise. So very much here, as you can see, cloud focus is people that are absolutely, that is their first port of deployment. Huge 22%, and that was back in 2014. I'd imagine that's moved up by at least a couple of points now. All the way down to cloud watchers. Really, these are people that are planning for it. So again, at Q, we're working with our clients all the way through this spectrum. Slightly different in the SME, and strangely enough, you've actually got potentially more that actually say they are deploying straight out of the box onto cloud. Now, I think probably some of that's to do with the economics, where you've got new startups. If you're a new startup, would you actually look at sinking a load of capital into buying infrastructure? Probably not. You'd probably look for cloud first to keep your expenditure as low as possible. And that very much brings us to where we actually see it with the client base, that within that adoption rate, 74% are multi-cloud. One of the things that we had when we founded VirtuStream was we had a go-to-market strategy that was very much, we were working with our existing client base, people were at infrastructure refresh intervals, and we knew and we were trusted by those clients. So these were people that were highly mature virtualization consumers that had just looked at it and said, well, actually, we can see cloud is becoming dominant. It's something we need to assess. And they looked at us to take their entire infrastructure. So we were moving huge amounts of workloads into off-premise cloud solutions. Now, I think what you're seeing is that there's a bit more specialization on the internal infrastructure. We certainly find people are probably deploying higher quality infrastructure items internally, but probably smaller and more focused. They're developing a whole service level architecture and say, well, actually, these are good candidates for cloud deployment, and then which type of cloud deployment suits them best. But these are potentially our crown jewels, and for various reasons, we want to run them on an internal infrastructure, albeit a highly specialized and probably moving towards an internal cloud fully developed solution. So obviously there's trends in the market, and I have a real tough time with what I call marketecture. Some of these things really sort of bleed into that. So obviously you've got the converged infrastructures where you've had vendors collaborate with each other to create sums greater than the parts. Integrated software stacks to make efficiencies. And so you see typical sort of players in there within the Cisco sort of frame, EMC, NetApp. So they've all got their own solutions that come into that. And there is value in those, so they will have certified designs. Certain applications have been tested to run in certain ways. Bleeding into the hyperconverged. Now, the inference here is that maybe this is an evolution actually of the first one. A lot of press around this. You can actually buy just off-the-shelf boxes. They've got everything in one box. But it's not a new technology at all. We actually had a world-first deployment of that back in 2007 with a client in their Tokyo office, where all it is at the end of the day, you've moved all the moving parts into a single chassis, and then you build them out. But you've seen startups come to the market specifically with a box product. Names in that space would be Simplivity. You've got Nutanix. They're probably the market leaders. But equally, the strange thing is you've seen something like VMware come to market, the ultimate don't worry about your hardware, trust the software to control everything. They came to market with their Evo Rail. Now, they don't actually manufacture the hardware. That's done with their partners. But it's a message that they've seen that clients are looking for more bespoke, more tuned hardware solutions where you don't have the call out to other pieces of infrastructure. It's all done in that single box, and they collaborate as almost not a grid, but they are as a cluster, and you start doing things like storage within the box and spanning it across each box. What it does give you is it gives you a platform where if you understand your workloads, you can actually predictably grow both your storage with your compute power. So they can make a really good solution, particularly if you're looking at things like DMZ deployments and things like this, where you need a smaller footprint without the cost point that maybe you're connecting back to sort of huge enterprise SANs and everything like this, so you can maintain your air-gapped environments. Certainly more optimized. The software stack going on top of it, everything is becoming software defined. If there's certain buzzwords out in the industry that have gone through, but we'll come to them in a bit, but certainly that is one at the forefront at the moment, that everything pretty much is now software defined. At the end of the day, it's really about freeing up your dependency on the underlying hardware and making services transportable. So very much playing out the cloud message. And very much the last point there on the technology, you're seeing, if you like, the first wave of genuinely from the ground up cloud integrated solutions. So a lot of the clients that we're working with are deploying on-premise solutions. An integral part of that is that back-end cloud connectivity. So again, where you have people sort of saying, well, actually our crown jewels are really important, we need to keep them on-premise, they can still do that, but actually as things progress through their life cycle, they might switch into a different architecture level that says, actually, that now makes sense. and they haven't got that huge upheaval that certainly we had with Cloud 1.0 of taking people's infrastructures. It can be built into the software-defined layer to say, actually, now push that out to the cloud provider or multiple cloud providers. So really interesting space that of looking at technology that genuinely is built from the ground up to integrate with cloud solutions. Certainly operationally, this is the thing that, as I say, we spend most of our time working with clients with now, into people are genuinely trying to move into that IT as a service market. There's huge pressure to move things out to the cloud, but you're now starting to see actually people are looking at the genuine cost of moving to the cloud. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. There can be certain cost models where if you've got a performance profile, you could actually build an infrastructure cheaper, more effectively yourself than throwing it out to the cloud, where a lot of the costs are actually done from almost a 10,000 view back. You're looking at it, it's only costing me 1p per whatever for a small amount. But when you start folding it on certain applications, that just doesn't scale, and you suddenly find you're getting punitive costs coming back just because when the application was deployed, they didn't really look at the whole architecture to understand, actually, we've worked ourselves into a corner now where data transit's killing us, the actual storage that we're using is killing us, it's on all the time, it's web scale, we're firing up instances all over the place. So it's very much a case of working to know the true cradle to grave cost of what a cloud application is going to cost you. And as I say, that's really where it's so important to define those service level, at an architectural level, to understand how does the application get executed. So very much as we're working with our clients, we certainly see backup as a service. I mean, I've even seen service as a service in some places. I haven't quite worked that one out, but someone out there is pushing it. But backup as a service was certainly the big one that a lot of people undertook. In certain instances, it can make a lot of sense, getting your data up to a third party. But where we typically find that the gap on that is the thought process about the likelihood of certain events to happen. So just a little bit of buyer beware there, that your daily backups, yeah, it works fine, you're going to get files back, but it's really that key bit for if I've got a genuinely big issue, how quickly can I get all that data back? Most of it's based on a drip feed, so getting huge amounts of data back very quickly to get a business back up and running, a lot of these services fall down on that and they haven't thought that through. The more enlightened ones actually, if they're providing that backup service to you, hopefully they've got some sort of infrastructure as a service by the side of it that you could actually quickly ramp up in that and be up probably quicker than what you could be alternatively. But at least it's been thought through to say, actually, if you do suffer a major issue, it won't be the actual speed of the data transit that's the issue. Security as a service. So security is tough. It's changing all the time. And by the time you've usually caught up with it, it's moved on. So what we're sort of saying is you still have to do those sound principles that everyone needs to protect your perimeter. But more often than not now what we're finding is actually a lot of the threats are coming from inside the network. So don't stop any of that good stuff at the perimeter. But understanding what's going on in your network at a behavioural level is becoming crucial. I was doing a talk yesterday on a particularly dry subject of the European Data Protection Regulation. It's big, it's dull, and it's pretty ugly, but it's coming. And some of the fines in there are absolutely punitive, and ignorance isn't a defence. So there's all sorts of statements within regulation about deploying state-of-the-art solutions to protect yourself. Doesn't go into too much detail about what state-of-the-art is, but it makes the statements. So these type of solutions very much would fit into that category where they're actually not based on known instances. So at the end of the day, you don't know what that next threat is coming from tomorrow. These systems need to be more intuitive than that and actually spot behavioural anomalies. So that type of thing suits a cloud deployment very well because they're the type of skills that aren't easily accessible in-house. So potentially going out and leveraging a security specialist that's got those skills and deploying it in a cloud solution can make a lot of sense. Database as a service, again, that's one that we've certainly seen a lot of our clients leveraging. They've got small internal teams. They might have projects ongoing to migrate from database platforms. That might be moving from big, expensive databases through to open source. And it's the skill sets you need to manage that type of project and then the ongoing management of those databases. So again, organisations that have been created specifically around that, but in a cloud environment. And as I say, optimisation as a service, this very much is looking at the individual infrastructure elements within your infrastructures, and then looking at optimising them as much as possible to give you a more highly performing stack. An example of that might be within, say, WAN optimisation. If you're leveraging cloud providers, then really you want your WAN to be as optimised as possible, because where you're landing, it may well be costing you for the data transit. So it's making sure that what you're sending is quality, it's not noise. So there's all sorts of things you can deploy as a cloud service within that space to keep your cost points as low as possible. So as I say, we're very much with our client base. They are on this roadmap. They are cloud consumers. They are deploying their own infrastructures. But it's really about that operational control where we're finding most of the pain and most of the focus. So it's really going through operational readiness with people to align it to maturity models. Again, it's fairly dull stuff, but it's that stuff that actually does need doing to make sure that you are running things as efficiently as possible, and certainly that migration into becoming an internal cloud provider. And as I've said, the sort of multi-cloud hybrid environment, it's really having that single pane of glass that can start to describe your multiple theatres. The control of that is critical. So some great new solutions out there that actually understand that landscape, can help you control it, and help you actually do the migration from an application level that you describe where you want it to sit, and you can actually maintain that. So massive, massive changes in there. And as I already said, the software-defined everything, software-defined data center, everything that sits underneath it, that's really leveraging that agility and ability to move physical placements. Without that, we would be stuck. But all the solutions coming down the line, VMware have got their latest announcements within that. They've made various acquisitions that support that stack as well. But they're not the only ones. Obviously, you've got the open stack, you've got the open source community. But everything is moving that way to enable you to create these transportable services. And as I touched on earlier, one of my big pet hates is, in IT we tend to find that everyone's trying to repackage something that was done before. I started in the 80s in mid-range computing, and for me virtualization was a return to sanity when I started seeing, I went through the whole client server where people were deploying racks and racks of stuff, heating up rooms and everything. It seemed madness, and when we got that first within the x86 space, feeling of virtualization, it went back to what we were doing back in the mid-range when things, for me, you felt like you had more control, there was more design, and there was more justification for the resources you were using. So that was great, and virtualization has been a huge success. Absolutely that powered the drive to the cloud. I have a little bit of a tougher time with the whole cloud concept in some ways, in that it's massively abused, the term. And how much technology is genuinely behind it. It's almost like it's a deployment model. It's not necessarily a technology. Technologies have to work with it, but it's not a technology in itself. And coming full circle now to, that's very much emerged now into becoming, everyone's got to tag it software defined. If you're not software defined, you're nowhere. But they're three of the same disciplines at the end of the day. It's really about just giving you that agile infrastructure, so that you can start making decisions and making them quickly and not being locked in. If we were asked to do 5-year strategies, the one thing I can guarantee is it probably won't end up being correct because it's been that far out. You have to plan much shorter, a bit like the development life cycles now with Sprint and everything that they do there. In the infrastructure side, we're pretty much playing catch up to that mentality, but we've got to get there, and some of this stuff actually does help that. So on that basis, if there's any questions, be totally open and honest about stuff. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, when you were talking about security as a service, you talked about the latest European legislation that's being debated, and you said there was reference to, in quotes, state-of-the-art technology.
Yes. Yep.
So what you're saying is it's no longer sufficient to be archaeological in your understanding of users of your network, or retrospective?
The trouble is that the statements are literally in the regulation, so my issue with that is they're ambiguous terms. There's nothing that actually defines what that is. They start softening it as you do it. I mean, if anyone's gone through some of the legislation, it's long, it's dull and it's boring, but it is in there. And it does start softening to say, well, actually, if you can prove that actually you've done all reasonable endeavours to protect yourself from, say, a data breach. So data breach, for an example, it's Article 31 in it. And the fines can be, at the moment it's 2%, but they want to move it to 5% of global turnover, or 100 million euros, whichever's the highest. Obviously there'll be a sliding scale, and there's actually a sort of 2-year probation period from when it comes in. So it's due to come in later this year. The likelihood is it's going to be late and be first quarter next year. And within that time, people will have a ramping up exercise to do. But I think what it's there to do is a lot of organisations thought you do go in and you can find stuff that's, you know, it's 8 years old, it's running there, it's deployed, and it's to stop that. They're saying, well, if it's 8 years old, you're not doing your level best to protect people's information. And the funny thing about the regulation is that it's not actually a jurisdictional limit. It's from the perspective of the person. So it covers global in its ambitions, because it's the data of any European citizen. So the idea behind that was to normalise. They didn't want to put an onerous thing on Europe of saying, well, actually, you've got to do all this, but the rest of the world, you can do what you want. So they've tagged it to the European citizens' data. So you know, it's a big deal, and I think there's a massive technology that you're going to see deployed with one eye on that regulation alone. Again, in the last 4 days, the sort of get out of jail card of safe harbour, that's now in doubt. There was a ruling, I think 4 days ago, that said it's not fit for purpose. And the guy that's made that ruling and recommendation, I think out of 10 recommendations ever made to the European Union, 10 of them have been adopted. So there's now you know, a great question mark over the thing where everyone said, actually, safe harbour, don't worry. There is potential that, you know, we will be locking horns with the States on this big time. So I don't think the phone tapping and all that sort of stuff really helps international relations from the data protection point of view. So I think the good thing is it will give an impetus to technology to say, actually, you've got to do stuff that bit more intelligent. And some, on the security side, some of that stuff is highly clever in the way that it is doing it now. So absolutely, you've got to do the traditional stuff, but if you're relying on things that are signature-based and everything, it's already out of date by the time you're doing it, and certainly the people that are doing the nasty stuff, they'll know about that and they'll find ways around it. So having that thing that sits inside and says, actually, this is how my enterprise usually operates, and then spots that that's a bit odd. Why is that sending that amount of data, to, not picking on China, but for an example, to China? We don't do anything out there. So it's those sorts of things that you'll find the technology aligning, but it's aligned then the skill sets. The trouble is, with all that stuff, it's highly specialised. It's one thing getting the information, it's another thing knowing what to do with it. So that's where we certainly see you know, those discrete cloud services. You can take the service as a cloud service, but equally you're bringing the skill set in as a managed service as well.
You talked about bringing in how good virtualization was, and it was great. Something that's really big right now is containerization. But then that's kind of turtles all the way down, right? You've got containers running in virtual machines, running on actual hardware. Can you talk a bit about that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting actually, because funny enough, VMware's first product was actually arguably a containerization. With their very first, back then it was called GSX, but at the end of the day, it was using an underlying OS. You've seen other ones come out that were doing it. Parallels were quite successful with a similar sort of thing where it's using the shared code base. At the end of the day, it makes sense for certain type. It has evolved. It had shortfalls there, but we are seeing quite a lot of people, with Docker being the predominant one, building up their Docker strategy and actually deploying stuff on it. And I think the good thing is now what you're seeing is there's more of an openness from the vendors to just accept that's happening. I think they've learned that the developers are out there, they're doing it. They're not going to stop them. So they're trying to help embrace it and help manage it. And so VMware provide a good example that they've really matured as an organisation. Dealing with them in the early days, we had a tough time. This is back at Virtualise IT. We were independent. We were fiercely independent, and we did try running the first European independent virtualisation event. We got buried. Literally, VMware were behind it one day, and I remember the lady's name. She went out, took a call. The next, we were told in no uncertain terms, do not run this event. The independent event is VMworld. You running that. So, but they have, as an organisation, you know, they've evolved, they've matured. So you can control your Docker, for them as an example, you know, using VMware. So they've not become these obstacles. So it can make sense for certain applications, and it'll be the best choice. I think the good thing is that they're not such big decisions. If it makes sense, do it. You haven't got to lose sleep about it. You're going to be able to control it. That's the main thing. And if you want to switch it to a different way of doing it, you'll be able to do that as well. So, yeah, you're not forced down these. I think all paths are open, basically, on that.
Right, unfortunately, we're out of time, but Adam, thank you very much. And show appreciation. Thanks very much.
Thank you.